Welcome to the Arkansas Food, Farms, and Forests podcast, the podcast bringing you the latest on food, fiber, and forestry research from the Arkansas Agricultural Experiment Station, the research arm of the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Hello and welcome to the first episode of our Arkansas Food, Farms, and Forests podcast. I'm Nick Kordsmeier, Director of Communications for the Arkansas Agricultural Experiment Station, which is the research arm of the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. In this first episode, you'll hear from our science writer, John Lovett, who spoke with the Center for Arkansas Farms and Food about the importance of educating the next generation of farmers. I spoke with Jennifer Acuff, Assistant Professor of Food Microbiology and Safety in the Department of Food Science, to talk about some of the science behind common food safety recommendations, especially with Thanksgiving just around the corner. And Fred Miller, our science editor, sat down with Casey Owens, the Novus International Professor of Poultry Science, to discuss her research program and the progress she's made towards fighting chicken meat quality defects like woody breast. With that, I'll pass it on to John, and thank you again for joining us on the Arkansas Food, Farms, and Forests podcast.
Small farms are an integral part of the food supply chain, providing nutrient-rich foods on a local level. But small farms and farming on the whole have changed in recent years, according to Heather Friedrich, Program Manager for the Center for Arkansas Farms and Food.
Farming has changed so much in the past, 50, 70, even 20 years. We don't have those generational farms that we've had in the past where that knowledge was passed, from father to son or, grandparent to grandchild or, you learn from your neighbors.
That's where the Center for Arkansas Farms and Food comes in. The center, called CAF for short, has a mission to train the next generation of farmers, especially farmers who don't necessarily come from a farming background.
It's hard for someone who is not connected to those systems to learn from someone like that does have that, years of experience behind them.
CAF is a service center of the Arkansas Agricultural Experiment Station, the research arm of the U of A System Division of Agriculture. It supports local food entrepreneurs and increases small farm viability through experiential learning, Friedrich said. CAF offers two major programs, a beginner's farm school and an apprenticeship program. Applications for the 2022 apprenticeship program are due by December 1st, 2021.
But if you are someone that does want to go into farming, you do want to produce fruits and vegetables because that's what we're really focusing on. If you do want to grow, and you're new to this kind of career path, like how do you get that knowledge and experience and build those connections? And so, those are some of the big reasons that we developed the center, because we do see that there is a big need to, foster that next generation of farmers.
CAF works closely with the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust and the Northwest Arkansas Food Conservancy to connect new farmers with land resources where they can grow food and help get the food to market in grocery stores and in restaurants.
The food system has a lot of different key players. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces. And so for just us to, focus on the farmer side of things would be kind of an incomplete picture. Once we do have graduates of the program, we also need land for them to farm on, and we need markets for them to plug into. And so by partnering with other resources that are supporting farmers, we just increase their chances of success.
Friedrich emphasized that successful farming depends on more than just working with the land. There's also a substantial business side to being a farmer that requires knowledge of marketing, networking, and bookkeeping.
It's just critical for farmers to get experience and get a glimpse into that side of the operation, because a lot of farmers go into this because they really, they're passionate about working with the land and they, passionate about working with the plants, but those business components are a little bit more challenging for them. It's less natural.
The Center for Arkansas Farms and Food created a curriculum for their farm school students that calls for creation of a business plan that helps build their brand online.
We have a really strong track in our farm school that really helps these aspiring farmers to learn what the business side of, running a farm looks like.
CAF business instructor Brooke Anderson said business management is integrated into every part of owning a farm. Over the past 2 years of the COVID pandemic, more people have shopped online, so farmers also need to know how to market their goods through the internet and on social media platforms.
When we're working with these new beginner farmers, we're really focused on making sure that they understand what their mission is with farming. Why are they wanting to do this? And then helping them communicate that to their customers. So that brings in that marketing side of things where they're communicating what they're growing and then having the customer with that feedback of where they want to buy that so that they can better strategize on from a business perspective.
The Center for Arkansas Farms and Food recently graduated its first class of 5 farm school students and just wrapped up the second season of Apprenticeship. Anderson said most of the participants are planning on continuing their agricultural journey.
Most of the graduates of the program are going to be continuing their agricultural experience, whether that's with farm ownership. A few people have started leasing some land and growing, or also managing farms for other people. So it's really exciting to see their farm journeys really taking off.
Anyone interested in learning more about CAF programs, please visit caff.uada.edu. Applications for the 2022 apprenticeship program are due on December 1st, 2021.
With frozen turkeys, leftovers, and homemade pies, Thanksgiving is the perfect time to talk about food safety. Food safety expert and microbiologist Jennifer Acuff said food safety is critical to keeping consumers safe.
We all eat food, and they're all subject to some kind of contamination or risk every now and then, so my research gets to kind of pick apart those risks and try to figure out how we can protect consumers.
Acuff is an assistant professor with the Department of Food Science for the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture and the Dale Bumpers College of Food, Agriculture, and Life Sciences at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. In addition to extension and teaching appointments, she conducts research for the Division of Agriculture's research arm, the Arkansas Agricultural Experiment Station. Acuff's current research focus is on food safety, especially in low-moisture foods.
That can include anything from powders to nuts, dried fruits, and even spices. And so I look at how bacteria are going to contaminate these foods and then how they survive on them, as well as how we can remove them once they're there. So a lot of my research involves a really kind of interesting group of foods that people don't necessarily assume would be risky, and I'm not saying they should, but there's always an inherent risk.
Acuff said her food safety tips have made her popular among family and friends.
It's fun. It's fun because, it feels like so many parts of my job are fun facts that I take with me everywhere, and so people like to ask me all the time about eating organic or local produce and, what temperatures to cook their meats to. And I get asked all the time about my food safety tips. I think sometimes it's a bit of a buzzkill if you're at a dinner with a group of people and then you're explaining to them why the thing that they're eating might be unsafe. So I always have to check myself and remember not to be the party pooper. But I really enjoy talking to people about food safety. I mean, it's been a passion of mine for a really long time. So it's just fun to share that.
Those fun facts underscore the importance of consumers taking charge of food safety in their lives.
It's important that everybody knows what food safety really is because it's a really multidisciplinary, interactive discipline and concept. And so it involves a wide variety of people. I think the most important part of that puzzle is just about the consumers. Making sure that everybody understands what they can control and what part they play in that puzzle is really important to me.
While food safety is important year-round, Thanksgiving does carry some particular food safety risks. Thawing that frozen turkey is one of them.
The safest way to thaw turkey is doing it well in advance and ahead of time. So the best way to thaw is probably in the fridge for several days. So there are calculators online that can actually help you figure out, okay, how long does this need to thaw in my fridge if it's, 10 pounds versus 20 pounds, because that's a big difference. And so, the weight of the turkey impacts how quickly it will thaw. Also, thawing it in the sink with very cold water can work, but a lot of times in holidays, we're preparing a lot of foods. There's a lot of traffic in the kitchen, and a turkey taking up a whole sink is a little inconvenient. So I don't really recommend that way just for convenience sake.
One particularly risky way to thaw the turkey is to leave it out at room temperature.
The outsides are going to thaw first, and the outsides are going to thaw and get to the point that they're at room temperature. And we have something called the danger zone in food safety and food microbiology, and that refers to the temperature at which bacteria are most happily growing. So when you thaw turkey at room temperature, the outsides of it, and then, gradually toward the inside, can get as high as complete room temperature, around 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the danger zone is 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So it sits in that danger zone and allows any bacteria that are on the raw turkey to grow to really high numbers. So we want to make sure that however you thaw it, you keep it below refrigeration temperatures, which is below 40 degrees.
Acuff said there are many intrinsic and extrinsic factors, like oxygen, water, and nutrient availability, and temperature, that affect the growth of bacteria, but temperature is one of the easiest for consumers to control.
A lot of the foodborne pathogens that we will get sick from really enjoy our body temperature, right? And that kind of makes sense that they're functioning very well at our body temperature, and that's how they get us sick so easily. And so they're already, accessing nutrients from that food, and if the temperature is just right, or if the oxygen levels are the right for them to grow, then they can really go wild in that environment.
With that in mind, Acuff said you really don't want to leave those hot or cold leftovers out all day.
So a lot of people have kind of almost a family tradition with holiday leftovers, and that is leaving them out all day and letting everybody, come by and graze on them throughout and watch the football games or the parades and everything. And that's not the best practice. If that food came out of the oven 2 hours ago, it needs to go into the fridge pretty quickly. So that's really what we recommend for storing leftovers is get them into containers where maybe if we're talking about a really thick stew, get it into a shallow container because it'll cool down quicker. If we're talking about any kind of food that's being handled, especially like a turkey that's been cut up, a lot of times people aren't wearing gloves in their own kitchen, right? And so they're handling the turkey and cutting it up, and you might have washed your hands, but your hands aren't sterile, so they're not completely without bacteria. And so as you handle that turkey, after about 2 hours or so, some of the bacteria that came from your hands might have grown to an amount that could really get somebody sick. So refrigerating leftovers after about 2 hours, even though everybody wants to keep them out, for as long as possible, is really the best way to make sure you don't have some unhappy guests later.
Baked goods, however, often fall into another category of foods called shelf-stable foods. The environmental conditions in these foods inhibit bacterial growth, Acuff said.
What contributes to this shelf-stable label has to do with things like water content, or what we call water activity, and also pH, so how much acid is there, and also kind of desiccation. So water activity and desiccation kind of go hand in hand. So if we're talking about a loaf of bread, right, that doesn't have a lot of moisture in it. And so it can sit out on the countertop, though you might have some mold issues later, right? Because if you leave it uncovered, eventually mold can grow. But in terms of bacteria, they're not going to like that environment very much because there's not enough water for them to be happy and grow. And so baked goods, like breads, have that kind of desiccated aspect of it.
Other desserts and baked goods like jams or fruit pies may have a high moisture content but are still considered shelf-stable because they have a low water activity.
Water activity refers to the water that is free in the food and not bound by something else. But something like a jam or jelly that has a high sugar content, that sugar actually binds to the water molecules, and when it binds to it, the bacteria can't access it.
If it doesn't have a high enough sugar content, though, these rules don't apply. Pumpkin pie, for example, might need to be refrigerated.
I personally prefer my pumpkin pie refrigerated and cold anyway, so I don't usually even have this problem. Pumpkin pie is a little bit different. It doesn't have quite as high of a sugar content, right? If you think about the ingredients, the pumpkin pie filling itself might have some sugar, but not nearly as much as like a pecan pie. And so I can't give you the exact water activity levels of those, but I would recommend keeping the pumpkin pie refrigerated. But I think if the sugar content is high enough, you might not need to. But if it's got whipped cream on it, I'd definitely get it into the fridge.
Acuff said that using a tip-sensitive meat thermometer and avoiding cross-contamination between ready-to-eat foods and raw foods are two more critical food safety recommendations. But one of the most important tips is to remember a skill we all learned at the start of the pandemic.
It has to be mentioned. I can't overstate the importance of hand hygiene. During the pandemic, it seems like we saw a potential dip in foodborne illness because people were finally washing their hands the way that we should all be washing them all the time. And so I think we're starting to kind of slacken on that a little bit as we're kind of coming on to hopefully the other side of this health crisis. And so I'm hoping that people still keep their hand washing habits so that we don't see a huge uptick. there's a lot of foodborne illness that just gets transmitted from person to person, and food plays a part in that. But using good hand hygiene can go a really long way in protecting your family.
So stay safe out there, Thanksgiving feasters, and thank you to Jennifer Acuff for sharing your expertise.
For more than 20 years, the main thrust of Casey Owens research has been improving meat quality for the poultry industry. And that's good, because during that time, the poultry industry has risen to the challenges of increasing consumer preferences for more and bigger chicken meat and growing export demands to feed a hungry world. But that growth has come at a cost. Processors are seeing increases in meat defects that cost the industry millions. Dr. Owens is the Novus International Professor of Poultry Science at the Arkansas Agricultural Experiment Station, the research arm of the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture, and the Center of Excellence for Poultry Science. She investigates meat quality defects in broiler meat, building a base of knowledge that will help develop novel solutions for this segment of America's food supply. Dr. Owens, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me here today. I look forward to this opportunity.
Great. I wanted to talk with you today about your research in meat quality. And I wonder if you could just start off by just kind of giving us an overview of the issue of meat quality that you're dealing with and why it's important in the industry.
Yes, so my area of research is with poultry meat quality. I specifically have been looking at broilers, so chicken, over the last, almost 20 years. I never exclude turkeys, but I get the opportunity to work with broilers a lot more. And so a lot of my research has gravitated towards quality and looking at quality defects and ways to prevent that or to assess it in order to have a quality control type system or use that in research or whatnot. So more recently, in the last, I'd say 10 years, we've been looking at white striping, woody breast, and some other issues that are affecting meat texture and some of the composition of the meat.
Can you tell us a little bit about how those meat texture defects would affect consumer enjoyment of chicken meat?
Sure. So white striping doesn't affect the consumer appeal in terms of eating quality to a great degree. It can maybe lead towards less juiciness, though we haven't really assessed that in a great deal. I don't know that a consumer could really tell. It could affect yields by decreasing water holding capacity. With woody breast, it's generally we have a little bit more fat and connective tissue in that type of breast meat, and so in more severe cases, when we have more of that connective tissue present, it can give the consumers where they perceive the meat texture as kind of chewy or kind of a gristly, just something with connective tissue in there. And so kind of changes the texture from a normal chicken texture that just is typically tender.
And what ways then does it affect the poultry industry in terms of the value of their product or how it affects their business in that regard?
So woody breast, we can observe that in the industry in different degrees of severity, meaning that in the most severe cases, there's just a lot more connective tissue, a little bit more fat, and so forth. And that can lead to those texture qualities that are negative to the consumers. And so the instance of that product has been up to upwards of 20% in certain plants. Certainly not that high in other plants. Sometimes it's related to the size of the bird that's produced. And in those most severe cases, it has the worst textural changes associated with them. And so oftentimes plants will divert that type of product away from whole muscle products, and so into something like chicken nuggets or something in that manner, so that the textural issues is not as apparent as it would be in a whole muscle product.
And that as far as the industry's perspective, that's a lower value product for them then, isn't it?
Yes, potentially. Usually whole muscle products are more premium in nature. But we the industry certainly does a lot of batter and breading of products, and so there's different avenues for meat to go to fulfill the orders. And so if we can divert some of the most severe cases into these types of products, then the textural issues are not as noticeable as it would be in whole muscle products.
When it comes to then causes of these issues, I know you've been looking into that, and you at least have some suspects, if not some outright perpetrators. What are you looking at in terms of causes of some of these defects?
Yeah, so we've been, like I said, we've been studying this for about 10 years. Really saw the white striping first, and then woody breast came a few years later, where we saw more of that issue. And during this last 10 years or so, birds have been growing a little bit bigger because of longer durations of growth. But also, birds, the broilers that we have in the industry do grow fast and very efficiently, speaking. So there's always going to be protein turnover in the muscle. And what will happen is that, kind of in a nutshell, is that when there is protein degradation, such as the muscle proteins, if the muscle can't repair itself soon enough, then it can be that muscle protein can be replaced with fat and connective tissue to fill in some voids. And so that's why we get those compositional changes.
Is that like scarring, a kind of scarring, or is it something different?
I wouldn't necessarily say scarring, but it is filling in those voids rather than having enough time for myofibrillar tissue, like the muscle tissue, to actually be repaired. Then those other constituents of the meat kind of fill in. So there's also a lot of research out in the research field to assess really the mechanisms behind why these changes are occurring. So some of it has to do with oxidative stress. We haven't really found the exact reasons behind it, but there's a lot of research going in those areas, and some of it may be genetic, some of it may be growth related, but we're trying to get to those reasons so that we can, we as in the industry can help reduce the problems. And I think we've seen some improvement over the last couple of years of decreased incidents in the industry as well.
Are there areas or effects from stress, like if the birds are stressed from heat or discomfort of any kind, or is that?
No, really, the impact of stress on the bird would actually potentially improve it because
Is that right?
If body weight is decreased and stress normally reduces body weight, then generally we'll see a little bit less of that severe incidence.
Then can you tell me in terms of some of the things you're thinking about as solutions for this, some things that are on the horizon that are potential ways to resolve this types of defect?
So I know the breeders are interested in looking at this, and that's kind of out of my area. And also from a management system, nutritionists have been looking at ways to feed the birds differently, and usually results in slowing the bird down and increasing decreasing the efficiency of that bird, which is, you want to increase the efficiency overall. So decreasing it leads to having a lower bird weight or more feed associated with it. So that's just a management tool. I'm not a nutritionist either, so I'm not really in those fields. But from the processing standpoint, we are looking at ways to detect the problem, because right now they're having to sort. If plants are sorting, they are doing it by hand. And if we are able to develop a system that they could do rapidly in the plants, that could assist, especially if there are some customers that have a higher standard or want less of the woody breast in their products. So some of those, we're trying to mimic what we would do with hand palpation or feeling those fillets by hand. And some of that can be used by instruments like compression force, where we have a force reader that will compress that fillet, and we get a force measurement that's related to the compression of that fillet. Other things that we have looked into is looking at further processed items. So we've been looking at chicken nuggets, for example, like a comminuted type of product. That's why I said earlier that if you can divert this whole muscle product into a ground type product, then the effects are not as great from a sensory aspect. And we've also looked at it in terms of use in deli loaves. And those can be more chunked in form. So some whole muscle pieces, but smaller, and you've got it mixed in with some normal meat. And so the effects aren't as great. So we've looked at multiple things in that nature. I have been involved in some nutritional related studies, but it's still kind of a management tool. And if something's going to help reduce woody breast, it generally will reduce the weight of the bird. And so if we can find something that does not affect the weight but reduces woody breast, then that's going to be a good potential tool.
I guess we should let folks know that these defects in the meat don't present, and I mean, I'd like you to speak to this because you're the expert. I'm just winging it here, no pun intended. But these defects in the meat, they're not really of a health concern for the consumer, right? They're not going to, there's not anything in the meat because of these defects that is harmful or unhealthy for consumers.
Right. So there's no food safety concerns. This is really a quality issue. So I said the composition does change, but it's a very small change, especially with like white striping. We can see increased fat levels, but still a relatively small change, maybe a 2% increase, like from 4% or to 6%, I don't have any numbers exactly in front of me, but it's not an overwhelming change to that. But the composition will change slightly, but not from a food safety standpoint is there going to be an issue. There have been some studies to look at some of the microbiological effects, and there's been no evidence to show that there's any harm associated with them.
Okay, good. What are some of the, I guess let me start again because I was about to ask you a question you already answered because you're that much ahead of me, which is a good thing. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the research you're doing with accelerometers. Mm-hmm. And these accelerometers, they're basically an electronic instrument that's commonly found in smartphones, smartwatches, and this kind of thing, fitness devices. Isn't that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so how are they being applied to this research in poultry meat quality? And what are you looking for it to do?
So I began a collaboration with some folks in the computer science engineering group. So Dr. King-Han Lee is a computer engineer with the University of Arkansas. And then Dr. Yan Huang in animal science was involved in this collaboration as well. And so we developed a proposal to look at these accelerometers to assess the meat and to assess really the vibration patterns of the meat. So when we apply some sort of force or movement to a table that the fillet is sitting on, how does that vibration come through the fillet? So that's one aspect of looking at it on a debone meat kind of platform.
As a sort of detection during the processing? To
look at it as far as detection. So this is very early stages of the work that we're doing. And so, the accelerometers are used in like a Fitbit or Apple Watch or on your iPhone. And really some of our preliminary work came from using an iPhone. But there's a lot of data that comes from that, and so it's really nice to work with the computer science folks. They really know those aspects, but I try to apply it in a way that could potentially lead to detection methods in the plant. We've also tried to look at detecting this in a live bird, and so that's a little bit more challenging, and so the results of this are really still underway. We don't have enough research to even give you any results at this time, but if that was if we were able to use accelerometers to detect it in the live bird, it could potentially help breeders or in research settings. It's not anything a producer would use if they've got a full house of birds to go through and detect, but it could be a tool in selection procedures and so forth.
So they could, say, weed out the birds that where they're detecting defects while they're still alive, and know that those wouldn't necessarily be a good cross for breeding.
Right. If it were to be in genetic families or something, and it's not even, I don't even know that we know how heritable it is in terms of, is it in this genetic family, is it in this other genetic family, because we see this problem in most broilers across the United States and the world, regardless of what strain. There's 2 primary breeders in the world, and so we see it across the board. So it's not that it's in this particular breed versus this other breed. And commercial broilers really are using the same breed; they're just different families. But there's 2 major companies out there that are used.
So it might help the breeders in terms of maybe finding a way to reduce or eliminate the problem, yes. But it's not really going to help in terms of identifying existing breeds, or
it would not really be useful to a producer that has a full house of birds that are going to market. Let's put it that way.
He wouldn't want to be going around strapping those on their wrists, right?
Right, for example, yeah, for sure. Yeah. But that would also be looking at vibration patterns that come through the bird. But it is more complicated with the live bird because there's these larger movements like a wing flap or respiration even. But we're trying to get to these minute movements through the breast fillet because the breast fillet, when it has a lot of collagen connective tissue in it, it has different vibration pattern to it. It's a little stiffer, harder, more firm, and that's kind of the characteristics that we look for when we are palpating that fillet. Is that characteristically has a harder touch to it.
And those instruments could measure those differences, and if you could identify those patterns in particular, then you would have a way of detecting, and a better method, maybe a more precise method of detecting these issues.
Right.
Interesting. So what's down the road for you in terms of research in this area? What are your next steps?
Well, we're still working on the accelerometer research, and then we also, in bio and ag engineering here with the Division of Agriculture, we have Dr. Dongyi Wang, who's just joined the faculty, and his expertise is in image analysis and robotics. And so we've been working with him, and I've actually introduced him to the computer science group that I've been working with to see if we can collaborate on a bigger project. And if we have the ability to even measure the amount of force on the fillet, just like our stationary system that we can use when we measure compression force, if he can use that with his robotic arm, then that's another way to possibly use that in the plant to detect that, because it mimics our hand palpation systems. Last year or the last couple of years, I should say, we developed some relationships between carcass shape features, used image analysis to detect woody breast in the fillets. And so we received a patent on that, and we're kind of in the midst of moving that forward. As we go forward, we'd have to find a collaborative partner.
Can you describe a little bit more about how that works, how the image analysis can detect woody breast from a non-defect containing breast?
Right. So there's already vision grading systems out in the industry that look for size and shape and defects, maybe like a missing wing, or to help grade carcasses. That's already existing technology. And so what we did in our lab was to look at the shape features of the breast on the bird. So sometimes that breast has more like a U shape. Now, remember that the birds are really hanging upside down. And so it's kind of a rounded shape at the top of the breast when it's hanging upside down versus more of a pointed shape. And so the rounded shape breasts generally have a higher probability to be woody breast than more of the pointed shaped breast. And so that just goes back to fillet yield and how much yield is on that bird and how much it's grown and developed in terms of the breast meat. Mm-hmm. And so those larger breasts tend to be a little bit more woody or have the potential to be more woody. Mm-hmm. And so we looked at thousands of images and we compared those to the debone breast fillet scores. We have a scoring system that we use, and we found some really good relationships in terms of predictability for that particular system. And so the goal would be to incorporate the algorithm or the mathematical part that I'm not very sure about, but those relationships into existing vision systems to potentially sort or at least give a heads up to the debone operations that, hey, we're going to have a little bit more woody breast today, or potentially give information back to like live production. What factors in the live production scheme are contributing to more woody breast in one flock versus another?
Is it the difference in shape because those connective tissues and things that fill in those gaps cause the meat to hang differently when it's...
No, not necessarily. It's just that the more as the birds get bigger with more breast fillet yield, mm-hmm. they have the higher probability to have more severe woody breast. And so when the birds have this U shape, and it's hard to explain on a podcast, mm-hmm. But the breast fillet is more full and it carries throughout from the top of the fillet throughout the end of the fillet, and rather than losing a lot of yield on the end of the fillet, it's carrying through more so, and those generally will have a higher probability to be woody. So they're growing well and a lot of protein turnover during that process and whatnot.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been interesting. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think would be important?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I continue to love poultry meat and look at ways to improve things as we go. And I'm just a proponent for eating chicken. So people shouldn't be afraid to eat chicken or be deterred by, I'm sure having a negative eating experience in a restaurant can deter somebody to eat chicken again, but or at that particular place or whatnot because of woody breast or whatnot. But there's a lot of good quality products still out there. I try a lot of chicken out there, so
that's what I'd heard. Somebody had told me that you like to go around and try chicken sandwiches in different places. Kind of an informal survey.
Right. So chicken sandwiches are a big key product for our industry and for fast food restaurants. And so this last spring and in the last year, actually, or the last year or two, there's been some chicken sandwich wars. And part of that started with Popeyes versus Chick-fil-A. Mm-hmm. That began a couple of years ago. So there's been quite a big increase in the number of chicken sandwiches in the marketplace. And so this past spring, I went on what I call the chicken sandwich tour and started trying all the new ones because there was a lot of new ones that were coming out. And so I involved my class in that process and kind of pointed out all the positives of things. I didn't have any sandwiches I hated. Certainly there were some times that I thought they probably could have been better. And I usually gave those products a second try, and they were, just sometimes you go through a restaurant and you don't get as high quality as you want. And it may just be that day or that shift or whatnot, but I had a lot of really good ones out there. So don't ask me my favorite one because I love them all.
It's kind of your own little survey tour. So.
Right. I really just want to promote chicken, and that's what I like to do with all my family and friends and whatnot.
Oh, great. Dr. Owens, I sure do appreciate you being with us today, and keep up the good work because there are a lot of people out there, like myself included, who really enjoy chicken, and we're always looking for the best quality, and I'm glad you're on the job.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and keep eating chicken.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you to all of our faculty and staff for joining us on our first episode of the Arkansas Food, Farms, and Forests podcast. As always, please visit our research news website at aaes.uada.edu/news to check out some of our other stories this month, including a story about how our Aroma 17 rice variety was a key ingredient in an award-winning gin produced by a Mississippi company, and a story about the state of weedy rice research. Just a reminder again, applications for the Center for Arkansas Farms and Food Apprenticeship program close on December 1st, so be sure to visit caff.uada.edu to learn more and apply. Thanks again for joining us on the Arkansas Food, Farms, and Forests podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more great episodes in the coming months. The Arkansas Food, Farms, and Forests podcast is produced by the Arkansas Agricultural Experiment Station, the research arm of the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Visit aaes.uada.edu for more information.